Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from the USA, English language, released in the year 2018, directed by Brian A. Metcalf, and this film is called Living Among Us. So Living Among Us is about vampirism. Supposedly these representatives from the vampire community have said that they are misunderstood, that they're not predatory towards human beings, that they've actually found a way to coexist with humans peacefully. Basically, they're getting blood from blood banks. So this has caused a bit of controversy. No one really believes that these vampires exist, but this head of this news corporation believes that this is a good opportunity for a story. So he sends out some documentarians to this house that supposedly belongs to these vampires, and they're going to document their life over a few days. So the vampire family are basically giving them a tour of the house. Something's a little bit off, but the documentarians don't really know what. So they decide to stay there for a few days, but as the days progress, they start to realise that maybe they've passed the point of no return, and in fact they're in grave danger because there might be a little bit more realism to this story for their liking. So whether or not that is the case, something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Living Among Us. I actually come away from this movie quite surprised, to be honest. Now the movie does have problems. The movie is a little bit amateurish here and there, but overall I thought it was a very enjoyable experience, and if you know exactly what you're getting yourself in for, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people out there are going to be very surprised also. I actually thought the entertainment levels were enough to really excuse the problems that the movie has. Now if you're not a fan of found footage, if you're waiting for that found footage horror film that's going to really set the standard and take the subgenre in a different avenue, then this movie is not for you. It's not going to provide anything terribly new, but I thought it was just a lot of fun because it plays in the lore of vampirism. The vampires in this movie, are they giving explanations as to what they're doing in a very realistic way? And I thought that was actually quite smart. It's actually playing a little bit with the lore. So although the movie doesn't play a lot with the formula of a found footage horror film, it still gives you that idea of the story that's a lot of fun to use. And so when the documentarians come to this house, I thought it was very spooky, is that the sense of dread and atmosphere was actually a lot better than I was expecting, is because the further they go into this documentary, the more they realise that maybe there's some hidden truths, and those hidden truths start to creep up on you, and I just thought it had a very unsettling tone that the film had. And so it also has a very all-star cast. You've got John Hurd, who was off Home Alone. He's also in a lot of other movies. It was good to see that he's supporting lower budget filmmaking. You've got Esme Bianco from Game of Thrones. So it's a movie that does have pulling power, and you can understand why. It's because a lot of attention has been put into the minor details to create that fun atmosphere that Brian A. Metcalf wants to create. And so you have a very grey palette. The colouring is very off, and I thought at the start of the film that's a little bit off-putting. I'm not going to really like this, but I thought it actually worked to its favour because it gives it that gothic feel. Is that this is a gothic sort of fairy tale that has gone really bad. And so that grey paletting, I thought, gives it an otherworldly dimension. So on one hand, I could actually really get into it, but on the other hand, at the start of the movie, it was a little bit off-putting. And that's ultimately the problem with this film, is that the start of the movie doesn't really get you on the right foot, which is something I'll go into a little bit later. But I also really like the gore effects. The gore effects were actually surprisingly nasty and very competently done. And so the violence in the film does hit you by surprises, because it is a little bit more hardcore than you would initially think. And the special effects also with the vampirism I thought was really, really good. So there's a lot of competent filmmaking in this movie that gives it that enjoyable value, and so I really liked that. I thought the acting here and there was okay. It was a little bit hit and miss, but there were some moments that actually had me chuckling. I thought the script was actually fairly good. It creates a very awkward atmosphere between the documentarians and these so-called vampires, and I thought that awkward sort of standoff was really entertaining as well, and so that was very good. And as I said, it just kicks into gear, and that sense of dread is that building up to something, and that something, I think, it's a rewarding payoff for the viewer. So that was all very good. But unfortunately, there are problems to this movie. Is that, number one, as I said, it doesn't provide anything terribly new. Although it is fun, it still has a very generic sort of formula. But there are moments in this movie that felt out of place, especially the news scenes. Now, when there's newsreaders are reading reports of these vampires, I thought it looked really, really cheap. And this is the problem with starting off on the wrong foot, is basically you've got those really cheap elements that I thought could have been completely wiped out of the film, and it would have actually benefited the movie, because, as I said, just starting it off on the wrong foot, you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is going to be one of those movies, is it? And so fortunately, when the news reporting basically vanishes, it starts to kick into gear, and you start to think, alright, I can really enjoy this. And you've also got that grey palette, and so the grey palette, the sort of that gives it that gothic feel, I thought was a little bit off-putting at the start. So I can see a few people turning this movie off before it really kicks into gear, which is a shame, because if you actually use the patience and actually get through those little areas, you get used to it, I definitely think this has its place as far as found footage horror films are concerned. So I thought the ending was was really rushed, and I didn't really like the way it finished. It was very convenient, and I just thought, alright, well, if you just eliminated those certain areas, I thought the movie would have been a hell of a lot better. And so there are moments there I thought were a little bit unrealistic. Well, obviously it's unrealistic, it's about vampires, but some of the reactions from the main characters to certain events I thought could have been a little bit more realistic, kind of give you that sense that there's a lot of panic in the air, so I didn't really like that. But as I said, the ending does get silly, and I thought, alright, especially right at the end, I thought it could have just cut that out and it would have been a lot better. So there are moments that I thought really indicate that Brian A. Metcalf has a massive future in horror, and hopefully he can go on to bigger and better things, but there are elements in this movie that do tie it down to some degree. But if you can look past that, there's a suspension of disbelief, especially in all found footage horror films. You're asking questions that are not going to be answered. So if you go in there expecting something that's going to be a completely fresh take on found footage, then this is not for you. But if you're on a Friday night and you don't have anything else to watch, I definitely think Living Among Us will appeal to you. There are some really entertaining moments, but unfortunately those negatives that I've just mentioned, basically getting you off, starting you off on the wrong foot, it is a little bit of a shame, because I just thought that with a little bit more patching and editing, this movie could have been really, really good. But in the end, what you get is an entertaining horror film that I'm sure is going to surprise a few people. So I didn't really expect a great film, I didn't really expect a terrible film, but I definitely got a very surprising film. So that's the best way I can sum this film up. It was surprisingly entertaining for the kind of movie that it was. So overall, for Living Among Us, going to give it 2.5 stars. Not bad, still go and see it. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.